Hi, welcome to Hardboiled Synthesis, Lecture 23. My name is Marc Lajeunesse, and today we are finally going to start our write-up phase, which is going to be I don't know how long. What I'm hoping is I'm going to have separate lectures for each chunks of the manuscript, starting today with the introduction. I wish I had great insight into pulling together this stuff quickly, but I don't. Writing has always been very difficult for me. Originally because, I'm Francophone, and writing in French is very different from writing in English, and translation-wise, you could do it, but the sentence structure is different. You use kind of different words to describe things. I remember a long time ago, people describing differences between French and English. And I don't know if these matter anymore, but I remember hearing things like, French, we put the meaning at the end of the sentence, whereas in English, you put the meaning at the top of the sentence. In French, you use as many words as you can to describe what you need to say, whereas English, you need to be concise, right? That stuff made sense to me at some point, but it doesn't anymore, mostly because I don't write in French much at all. It's 100% English at this point. And I've been at it for 20 years, writing almost strictly in English. And so I think I've kind of forgotten a lot of those weird hiccups that I used to have in writing, but it's still an awful, tortuous endeavor. Mostly because for me, the writing needs to make sense to me. And I'm not satisfied by putting a sentence down and me not understanding what I mean by it. And that may seem like a weird thing, but when you do a lot of scientific writing, it's jargon heavy, it's concept heavy. Sometimes you're just like pulling together sentences and you don't really quite understand exactly what you want to say, but you've seen other researchers write it in that way. And so you're following the formula, you're following the practice of like trying to report these findings, but it's not clear, it hasn't gelled in your head yet whether or not you're doing the same thing or whether it's appropriate to describe it a certain way. Today, I'm going to start drafting stuff. And my philosophy for this is going to be very different from the way I normally write because, I'm writing in front of you guys and I don't want to be spending here working on days upon days on a single paragraph, which I do. I'm notorious for just like tinkering phrases, words. I mean, one of the big hangups I have is like the leading sentence of the introduction. I mean, that needs to be awesome in my books. And so I spend way too much time working on that. You'll see some of that today. Some of the bad writing practices I have. But because this is the nature of the course, I can't sit down here and write out a fully complete, highly polished manuscript in front of you guys. And so I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to like provide you guys structure on how to organize your ideas, and then off camera I'll flesh things out, add citations, add, I don't know what else to say, like scientifically appropriate material. That'll make more sense later because right now I'm just going to kind of spitball on paper, get all my ideas out, get my structure out, which means I'm not really going to look at what other people have written already about catnip and mosquitoes. And so I got my Word document here, and it's blank. I already have some stuff written. Way back early in the course when I was pulling together material for the methods section, I messed up big time. What I wanted to do is like every time I would make a new decision or apply something, my original idea was to have it, to me, write it up right away. Well, the course has gone on for 22 lectures at this point, and I really only did that for 2. And so I'm way behind in terms of writing. And so I think, let's go to my my wall of shame here, and I'm going to add a few things that I feel like I messed up. The first thing is, we'll call this section reporting. The first thing is I should have just written stuff along the way. I mean, that would have saved me so much trouble, because now I don't have anything written down. I have to remember what I did. I have to write up details that I've done. Like, it's almost been 2 months now for the course, and so I got to rethink all that stuff. It's way better that if you like make a decision about something, that you put it on paper right away. That way, when you come to this phase, the writing phase, all the details are already on paper. You just need to polish it up and make it readable. Let's see if that shows up. There we go, yeah. And the second point I want to make is I am going to just start writing without referring to the literature. And typically what I like to do is just read up a lot before I even start this process, just so that I know what is typically reported in an introduction. What are the heavy hitters that I need to cite? Like, what are the pioneers? Who are the people that kick-started these investigations? I really don't have a really good idea for that. I know there's Tom Eisner, who did stuff in the 60s. And then there's like, what's their name? Peterson and Coates. They're the ones who got this press release at the beginning. If you feel free to check out my video of how I figured out the origin of catnip being 10 times more repellent than DEET. It seems like it originated from a press release based on a talk at a conference, and it took a super long time for that paper to come out. That whole story is very complicated. I actually want to talk about that stuff in the paper. But anyway, those are the two groups that I really feel like I need to talk about. It seems like there's no researcher out there that's fully committed to catnip, doing repeated publications where the research program is understanding the efficacy of catnip as a repellent. It's just, the literature is just a bunch of one-offs by random researchers. And so in that case, that's good for me, because, it doesn't mean I need to collate all that history or a sequence of discoveries. I could just describe what I did. But in terms of reporting, did not read studies, which I just realized now it's the first thing in my wall of shame is did not read studies. So it's a repeat. All right, so it's something I should have done early on, which I did not do again. Now, I read the studies when I was extracting data from those studies, right? And typically, because I tend to print everything out and make notes, I also make discussion notes on the manuscripts, where I'm like, oh, every time I read a paper, they always discuss something, mosquito age. But nobody ever really tests it. I feel like, oh, that's a cool discussion point I need to include, is that there's a gap in knowledge, and a lot of people have referred to this gap, and it remains unaddressed. So usually I have like a nice list of all that stuff before I even start writing. I got none of that here. All right. And if enough chitter chatter I mean, let's get to it. So I got my Word document, and my goal is to be concise as quickly as I can, get to the point. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have like this loose structure, which I just kind of balloon, I grow, and I fill in the blank, and I'll fill in the blanks later, the scientific bits later. Like, for example, I don't know who was the first to use nepentolactone as a repellent to mosquitoes, right? I don't know what is the proper citation to use if I'm talking about catnip in general. I know there's a review paper out there that talks about the secondary plant compounds of catnip, but I remember skimming it through, but I never really read it. So let's just jump into it. Okay, so this is going to be brutal. Writing a manuscript from... why did I do this? Okay, so the way I like to set up an intro, and this is my formula, and it follows the weird, I call it weird because, the hourglass shape of scientific writing. I think that's a common thing that's taught. I forget all that stuff. You start off really broad. It's like an inverse pyramid. You narrow down your topic. The most narrow part of the hourglass is like the results. And then in a discussion, you kind of conceptualize, you put things into perspective, you generalize. That stuff is hard to fit with research synthesis reporting because conceptually, the results technically are some of the broadest generalizations, statements you make. I mean, you're synthesizing an entire literature. I mean, how narrow? That's not narrow at all. That's super broad. And so the intro and the discussion tend to be fairly narrow compared to what you describe in the results. I mean, in the intro here, I'm going to talk about, people have done research on catnip. I mean, that's a narrow viewpoint of the entire literature, the entire catnip repellency domain. And so maybe for synthesis, it's more like a vase shape where it's narrow, broad, narrow. That's conceptually, I guess, writing-wise, the results are narrow because you're talking about stats. Maybe that's what that's meant by that. Okay, no more talking. I need to write. So I'm going to ask a bunch of questions, and then that's going to be the formulation of my paragraphs. I mean, I got to just get this on paper. First thing is super easy. What is my topic? That'll be my first paragraph. In some scientific writing, I think it's often argued that you need to have like 1 point per paragraph. Yeah, maybe. I don't think I ever followed that rule. I mean, sometimes in my manuscripts, I have like these monster paragraphs that just like are catch-alls of many, many different little ideas, right? Maybe many little ideas together could gel into a big idea. I think I fail a lot at that. What is my topic? What is the problem? What's the problem with the topic? How did I address this problem? Right? So this is going to be my structure for the intro. And in fact, so this would mean I would have 3 paragraphs. In fact, what I want is I just want a 2-paragraph intro. And so I'm gonna squish together. I'm gonna squish 2 ideas into 1 paragraph. Sorry, folks, I'm breaking the rules. Just to make it easier. I mean, I think I could get away with this because catnip repellency studies is not a conceptually heavy domain. I mean, people are just testing catnip. And I'm not describing things ecologically. I'm not describing anything in an evolutionary context, right? I'm not saying stuff like cats love catnip because it provides protection to mosquitoes. That to me is like very adaptationist, right? The standard of evidence to make that claim is fairly high. But I don't have to deal with any of that stuff. Maybe I could squeeze some of that in discussion, but the intro, I'm just going to be flat out. This is literature. This is the literature, and I synthesized it. There you go. Okay, so 2-paragraph intro, I think is doable. What is my topic? Okay, so I really want, I'm being really rigid in my structure here. I want this to be about 5 sentences. And because I squished 2 things here, I'm going to allow myself 6 to 7 sentences. It's like I'm playing a game where I have this rigid structure that I have to work around. Okay, let's focus on what is my topic. So the lead sentence of the intro, the first sentence in the intro, really sets the pace for everything that follows. And for me, this is what causes the most anxiety with writing is this one sentence. I mean, I don't know why it absolutely, I find it aggravating to pull together. It's the one thing I rewrite over and over and over again. Sometimes I wish I was kind of like a Bob Ross or a Jackson Pollock type writer where it's just like one and done. But the reality is I would be more of the intricate painter that just like repaints the eye over and over and over and over and over again until I either give up or I'm just like fed up with it. And I'm like, that's it. I'm settling on this. So the lead sentence sets the pace. In science, I think in meta-analyses and research syntheses, the lead sentence is often like a summary sentence. Like what am I synthesizing? I think that's a good start. Another cool way to start a lead sentence is like an honest lead sentence where you upfront describe your motivation for the study. I like those too. And I think that's the one I'm going to take here. So like a summary lead sentence for the manuscript here would be, catnip has been used in many studies as a repellent against mosquitoes. I mean, that's a fairly good summary of everything that's been done. But because I want to talk a little bit about my motivation, I want to do this a little differently. I want to have some fun here. And I'm probably going to get slapped around later when I submit the manuscript that, you shouldn't focus the study on this. But I want to be honest about my motivation. And at the beginning of the course, right, my motivation was just to test the claim that's floating around in social media that catnip is 10 times more effective than DEET. That was my entire motivation. And so I'm going to stay honest with that. I'm going to stay true to that. And then that'll be my lead sentence. So somehow I got to figure out, I think it's a very unusual start to a manuscript to talk about social media. But I feel like a lot of this course has been like some type of science activism where I'm just kind of like, there's weird ideas floating out there. Science can address these ideas. I'm one of those guys who could try to address those ideas. And so, I wish I could have other people are really good at writing lead sentences or paragraphs or writing in general. It just becomes super easy for them. I've certainly sat down with a few researchers who could just flat out write an entire paragraph, non-editing right away. And I'm just amazed. I can't do that. Call me Ishmael. I did not write that right. Ishmael, right? That's a lead sentence, right? Moby Dick. But in my case, I just want like something, I just need to get my ideas out. So I'll keep it vague. On social media, a pervasive claim is repeated. This is an awful way to start an intro, but I'm just getting an idea out. Catnip is 10 times more repellent to mosquitoes than DEET. Right? That's a super weird way to start a sentence, but I really I don't care at this point. I need to get these ideas out. So on social media, pervasive claim is repeated, right? Okay, so that's my lead. It's not going to be this, but this is kind of in the direction I want to do. I should have thought more about this. This is really awful. Catnip is 10 times more repellent than mosquitoes than DEET. Here, I address this claim by synthesizing studies testing catnip or its active compounds or its active compounds. Here I address this claim by synthesizing studies testing catnip, published studies testing catnip or its active compounds as a repellent. I mean, this is very chatty, first-person-y intro. A lot of my students struggle with the first-person, third-person perspective when it comes to writing. My opinion is always use first-person. It's like the easiest way to write. It's the clearest way. But you know, in a science degree, you get influenced by other disciplines, physics, chemistry. They have a totally different writing style, and so they're always like pushing third person. I feel like that's very old-fashioned science writing is third person. I don't even remember why third person is like the old-fashioned style. It's like maybe the author is trying to be more objective, right? First person is like arrogant, subjective. I did this, I made this. It's very opinionated. It's at a very opinionated tone. Whereas third person, you know, you remove the voice from the words, from the text. And so now it's all like more objective, right? Who are you fooling with that stuff? I mean, there's an author. The author's going to have opinions. They did the research. Just be honest. Just tell us what you did. Hence this. I'm telling you exactly what I did. Here I address this claim by synthesizing published studies, testing catnip. Okay, so I got two sentences here. One is like broader perspectives. Conventional intro would have just talked about the studies, but I'm talking about the societal impact of some scientific research, which I think has a negative impact because it's not right. Well, we know that catnip is not 10 times more repellent than DEET because of our meta-analysis. Here I address this claim by synthesizing published studies. You know, I'm just like a rambling today. My favorite intro paragraph includes conclusions in it. I mean, it just tells you right away that we found this. It's something you see in once in a while in older literature. Is sometimes they just cut straight to the chase, and I just love that. There's no flowery, roundabout way to describe the research. You just kind of go about it. Maybe that's the tone I want to set with this. Here I address this claim by... I've already set a weird tone. Here I address this claim by synthesizing published studies, testing catnip or its active compounds as a repellent. I'm just going to flat out... This is my take-home message, is catnip is inconsistent. It's an inconsistent repellent. That's what I found with the meta-analysis. And so I want to prime the reader right from the start, put it in their heads, it's inconsistent. And then the conclusion of the paper will be like, it's inconsistent if you synthesize the research. So the efficacy of catnip as a mosquito repellent is inconsistent. Right, and this is the narrative review part where I kind of cherry pick positive examples, null examples, and negative examples. This breaks some of the philosophies we have in research synthesis, right? Research synthesis, we're trying to get an overall view of everything that's been done. Intros, though, is like a mini narrative review where you're selectively picking things to make your point. I mean, there's no way to avoid that. But some studies report strong effects, right? And so I'll go back and I'll fill in the citations here. Others, no difference from DEET. Some studies report strong effects, others no difference from DEET. While I'm using others too much. While others report DEET as being the better repellent. Okay, so here I kind of lay out some context, my motivation, and the problem. I kind of squished all that stuff together. I'm going to highlight these things because these are things that I need to impute with real information. I'm going to need somehow a reference here. I don't know what I'm going to do with this. This is going to be I guess it's going to be a link to Twitter. I'll need to figure that out. At least I have that press release, right, that I could cite, which was 20 years ago and seems to kick off this whole this claim. The efficacy of catnip. On social media, a pervasive claim is repeated. Catnip is 10 times more effective than DEET. Here I address this claim by synthesizing published studies. This almost reads like an abstract, but whatevs. Addressing this claim by synthesizing published studies, testing catnip or its active compounds as a repellent. The efficacy of catnip as a mosquito repellent is inconsistent. Some studies report strong effects, others no different from DEET, others no differences. While others, clearly I need to polish that, need as being a better repellent. This is awful. All right. What do we got here? We got 3 sentences. Efficacy. And so maybe I like to end the sentence with like, why is it important to know whether or not catnip is a consistent repellent? I mean, out of the thousands of plant-derived compounds used as repellents, like why catnip is unique amongst these. I don't know. I'll have to read Tom Eisner's paper on what his motivation was to test it as a repellent in the first place. Real bummer of Tom Eisner's study in the 60s was he didn't test it against mosquitoes. He just like, I think what he did was, this is a crazy science paper. He just like had like a sheet outside at night with lights. You know, entomologists do this to look at what's out there. And I think he just took like catnip or maybe the compound, the nipetolactone, and he just like, does it fly away or not? You know, that's basically what he did. And he, you know, he did that with like midges, and he did it with beetles and other things that are attracted to light sources at night. That was the entire paper. But nonetheless, you know, I guess influential in a chemical ecology sense, because, you know, back then, knowing that plants have properties, secondary chemical properties, is just like a cool thing to discover. All right, on social media, pervasive claim is repeated. Catnip is 10 times more repellent to mosquitoes than DEET. Here, I address this claim by synthesizing published studies testing catnip or its active compounds as a repellent. This also needs some references. The efficacy of catnip as a mosquito is inconsistent. So this sentence right here is the tropey sentence. It's almost always baked into every single meta-analysis, right? The goal is there's results all over the place. My motivation is to reach consensus, to find explanations for that. That was not my motivation. I did not know that there was going to be inconsistencies in catnip. I just thought it was just like not useful. Okay, so here I address this claim. By synthesizing published studies in catnip. And so the question I want to ask now is, how did I address this claim? How did I now here I'm going to say I flat out just did a meta-analysis. I did not fully do a systematic review. Right, the two disciplines overlap. The best possible synthesis is that both. You did a systematic review and meta-analysis. I did not fully do a systematic review because I just searched one database, if you remember. And so I'm just going to call this a meta-analysis. I did not win the award to say that I did a systematic review. Right, so that's not something I could ever describe ethically, I guess, in my paper, that I did a systematic review, because I did not. I searched for studies, I did a meta-analysis, but I didn't do a robust, rigorous search to find all the literature. I use meta-analysis to what am I doing here? Reach a consensus on whether catnip repels mosquitoes, whether it is more effective than DEET, and whether it performs consistently as a repellent. Right, so those are the three things I'm going to hit on. I'm going to provide analyses for whether or not catnip repels mosquitoes, whether catnip is equal to DEET, and then finally all those things that introduce inconsistencies in repellency, which include experimental design, which includes mosquito species. This is where I'm going to throw this in here. Right, so all this stuff will have references. And the references here are really placeholders for research that have done what I'm describing. I mean, this intro is turning out to be fairly lame, but at least I'm getting stuff on paper. This is a draft. For me, at least, the biggest challenge is just getting stuff on paper, so I'm pushing through. I use meta-analysis, and so here I want to make the few points of like what could introduce inconsistencies. Include heterogeneity in experimental design. Mosquito species, applications of the repellent, and repellency responses measured. All right, so let's just throw in a bunch of EGs in here. Arm in cage, wide tube tests, choice tests, mosquito species self-evident, applications of the repellent, e.g. essential oil, active compounds, isolated active compounds, and repellency responses measured. This is like hugely inconsistent too. For example, spatial versus contact measures. Some of that is like not independent from experimental design, right? Like a Y2 choice is a spatial test, I think. Whereas an arm and cage is like contact, really contact testing. Okay, so I think I got what I wanted here, right? I use meta-analysis to reach a consensus on blah, 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 blah. And maybe end with what my goal is. What is my goal? Again, my motivation was unusual because I wanted to address social media claims. I don't think I could get away with that scientifically, even though I say it in the introductory paragraph. My goal is to Yeah, let's forget about that bit. Leave it for later. I'm okay with this. Okay, is it often? Is it awesome? No. It's awful. Really. The lead sentence is just nonsense. But I like the way that feels. Like I want to be. It's an honest lead sentence. I was motivated to do this project because I wanted to address that social media claim. But after doing the meta-analysis, I learned so much about what actually happened here. Maybe I could spend time describing that history. I don't feel like that's so interesting. You know, normally you don't, in a scientific publication, at least a meta-analysis, you don't talk about the events that occurred that led to publications. I mean, that's cool stuff, right? So-and-so was the first to do this study. A consequence of them doing that study was there was a media attention. That attention got diffused to social media. Researchers followed up, testing catnip. The results are all over the place: positive, negative, neutral outcomes. Something I don't discuss here is that patents were filed. Plant-derived compound patents were filed. Derived chemical patents were filed. I mean, all that stuff seems to me like discussion stuff because I can't really test any of that with my meta-analysis. Okay, well, there you go, folks. This is a really drafty introduction. I'll save it. It is mega short, clearly, but I think I got some of the hard, concrete, fundamental ideas put down, which are not very conceptually heavy. I think I'm wrote it in a way for my target audience, which is not necessarily catnip people, but repellency, people interested in repellency stuff. And I think that's it. All right, so I'm going to clean this up at some point. But the next lecture, we're going to do the methods, which I think is going to be way more straightforward than this nonsense. Oh boy. Okay, so I'm pushing forward. I wish I had great insight into writing this stuff. There are certainly formulas you could follow in reporting research syntheses. My advice, maybe I should have said this advice from the start. My advice is to, find a meta-analysis or systematic review you like, and mimic the structure. Don't plagiarize. Clearly, don't plagiarize. But just see how the paragraphs are formed and how the ideas are presented. And I think that's a nice template to kind of work off of. Here, I'm just kind of doing it off the cuff, which is clearly not the best way to write. But, I'm, rather than me just kind of like burning the midnight oil trying to write stuff in an iterative way, I don't have time for that. I'm talking a lot and I'm writing at the same time about a subject that I'm not totally fully familiar with. You'd think at this point I know a lot, but I don't still know a lot. Anyway, I'm learning along with you. Thanks for hanging out with me again. And take it easy.